Ever left a family gathering early just to protect your peace?
You can't wear black, my sister said, chin tilted like she was measuring me for a smaller life, and the way she said it, so light, so careful, like a hostess placing a toothpick flag into a cupcake, told me she had rehearsed it. Probably in the mirror while adjusting earrings that looked expensive because they were, not because they suited her, since nothing about Amanda ever suited her except power, which she wore like perfume you could smell from the driveway. I said nothing, because silence has a better memory than any argument, and because I learned a long time ago that when Amanda dictates the dress code, she is not really talking about fabric, she is talking about rank. And the only way to win with a person obsessed with rank is to let them think they are winning until there is simply no room left on the scoreboard. She called it a family dinner, but it was a performance with assigned seating, a curated guest list, and a theme that shifted depending on who she wanted to impress. Last fall it was Cozy Harvest, which meant we were all props for a cornucopia centerpiece the size of a small child, and 2 springs ago it was French Bistro, which meant she walked around saying bonsoir to people who had just driven across town in traffic and wanted water, not theater. This time the theme was elevated minimal, which is a phrase people use when they have spent too much money on beige and need you to notice the price tag, and in that beige universe, black was apparently reserved for important people, which in her taxonomy meant donors, bosses, or anyone she was not related to by blood. I let the words fall between us like a dropped fork and watched her face for the tiny relief she always gets after delivering a jab, that little exhale that says she believes the hierarchy is safe for another season, and I smiled the smile she hates. The one that looks polite until you read it twice. I said, "Got it," in the same upbeat tone you use to confirm a dentist appointment, and I even nodded once, because compliance is the softest possible rope, and you can do a lot of careful tugging with it if you are patient and your hands are steady. Growing up, she collected my embarrassments like bottle caps, tucked them away on a mental shelf, and brought them out when company came. The choir solo I squeaked in 7th grade. The prom dress I saved for by working weekends at a diner and then spilled marinara on before photos. The college rejection letters I threw away, but she somehow saw first. She had a gift for turning private bruises into public decor, and our parents, decent people who disliked conflict more than they disliked unfairness, would clap along to keep the peace, which trained me to make my peace elsewhere. I learned to file, to wait, to label, to document, to let her think she had the only microphone in the room while I built an archive. So I did what I always do when Amanda performs authority. I thanked her for the instruction and asked what time she wanted us to arrive, what dish I should bring, whether she needed extra glassware, and I took notes while she spoke. Not because I planned to follow every directive, but because writing things down calms me, and because paper remembers. I wrote "no black" in my small notebook and bracketed it, then wrote centerpiece height and seating chart and who's at end of table. The way a person might sketch a crime scene before anything goes missing. She mentioned the donors from her husband's firm who might stop by for a toast, and the neighbor who just joined the board of a school with a wait list as long as a winter, and how she wanted the photos to feel timeless but aspirational. Which is a sentence that does not mean anything until you understand that what she really meant was that she wanted to look like the person who tells time what to do. After the call, I stood in my kitchen with the refrigerator humming like it knew a secret and let the quiet soak in. I pulled out the little cedar box where I keep the few things I never want to lose, an old church program with my grandmother's handwriting, a dried sprig of lavender from a case I do not let myself think about before bed, a folded note from someone who told me once that restraint is not the absence of force, but the tightest harness on it, and then I made a list that was not the list she would have written for me. The dress code went at the top, not the color but the concept, because color is just paint and concept is architecture. Under it I wrote light, by which I meant to keep my tone conversational and my expressions mild, and under that I wrote pressure, by which I meant to make sure the weight of what I knew would sit invisibly on the tablecloth until the moment the cloth moved. For the record, I do own black that is not about status, but about simplicity. A sweater that forgives, flats that do not punish, a coat that has seen 2 cities and a winter that tried to bite. I could have worn any of it and let her correct me at the door. But the small satisfaction of breaking a rule in front of the person who wrote it is not as delicious as letting the rule turn itself inside out while everyone watches. So I picked a dress the color of deep midnight with a blue thread that would read as respectful in photographs and still carry its own gravity, and then I made a call to a florist who understands symbolism better than most people understand their own calendars. I ordered low arrangements so guests could see one another and specified black dahlias, black calla lilies, and the faintest ring of white ranunculus to keep the whole thing from collapsing into mood, and I signed the card for the important people, which, yes, was petty, but sometimes petty is a scalpel when a hammer would only bruise. Because I am, despite my better angels, a woman who enjoys a precise consequence, I also forwarded Amanda's dress code text to Aunt Lorraine, who has never met a rule she did not interrogate with a raised eyebrow and a kind voice. And I asked if she might like a ride to the dinner. She said she would love one, and by the way, she had a very elegant black shawl she had been waiting to wear somewhere aspirational, and I told her that sounded perfect. I added a brief reply to Amanda, all set, see you at 7, bringing something light, and I meant it, because what I was bringing weighed nothing and would not stain the carpet, but it would sit in the room whether she wanted it there or not. Then I closed my notebook, tucked the florist receipt under the cedar lid, and let myself enjoy the smallest, neatest revenge. Not a raised voice, not a confrontation. Just a delivery scheduled for 7:15 with a card that would make her smile freeze for a heartbeat while everyone else reached for water and wondered why the flowers looked like a verdict waiting for its name. Amanda's text about no black for anyone not important sat at the top of our family thread like a school rule taped to a hallway wall, and I watched the read receipts stack up as cousins and in-laws scrolled, sighed, and decided, as always, that compliance would be cheaper than friction, because with Amanda there is a service fee for every objection, an invisible surcharge that shows up later as a cold shoulder at Thanksgiving or a suspiciously small scoop of this special potatoes she reserves for people who please her. I put my phone face down and let the room hum, dishwasher, kettle, a neighbor's leaf blower sawing it Saturday, and I thought about how long we have all paid the fee without ever getting a receipt, and how good it feels to keep a receipt or 3 of your own, neatly filed behind calm expressions and polite nods that make people think you are soft when really you're storing up weather. If you were to diagram our childhood on a whiteboard, it would not look like a tragedy, it would look like a cheerfully decorated flowchart where every decision path funnels toward Amanda's comfort, because the house ran smoother that way, or so we were told. And if I wore the wrong thing to a choir recital or asked to switch carpool days without a 60-day notice, that was a learning moment about being flexible for the family. She learned that flexibility is for other people, and I learned that quiet is leverage if you can stand the taste of it. I can still taste it, sometimes like a penny under the tongue, sometimes like that first burnt sip of coffee you take because you are late and pride is faster than patience. I swallowed it through a prom night where my dress, paid for in tips and blisters, met a meatball on the driveway, through a graduation where Amanda lifted my cap to fix it and left my hairpin on the floor, through a Thanksgiving toast where she thanked everyone for carrying me through a hard year I survived alone, because gratitude that mislabels itself as charity still photographs well. I kept my work quiet not because I am a hermit, and not because I wanted some theatrical reveal like a television finale, but because I learned that what Amanda cannot see, she cannot belittle into something ornamental and safe. I studied late and took the bad cases people build their mornings on, and when I failed, because anyone who does anything worth doing fails, I failed in a room that did not echo with her commentary, and when I passed, I put the certificate in the cedar box, not on the fridge. She thinks silence is emptiness. I know silence is scaffolding you take down after the building stands on its own. I will say this for her. As an event planner trapped in the body of a suburban politician, she is thorough. The seating chart arrives with the gravity of a jury list. The candles must be exactly the height that flatters her without making her look like she is auditioning to be a chandelier, and the appetizers are timeless favorites with a twist, which means deviled eggs wearing microgreens like tiny hats and shrimp on skewers that look like they were designed by a dentist. She had already texted out assignments. Bring something light, Do not wear black, arrive at 7 sharp, tolerate a toast about her husband's new partnership expansion, and I, being the easy sister, replied with a thumbs up and wrote my own assignments on a separate list. Check on Aunt Lorraine's ride, follow up with the florist, and take one small stitch out of Amanda's banner without tearing the fabric in a way that would make us all pretend not to notice. The stitch presented itself when Brianna, our cousin who owns a little boutique that keeps half the PDA clothed in dresses that forgive cake, texted privately to ask if no black applied to accessories, because she had a leftover run of black shawls that look expensive and feel like a relief. I wrote back that Amanda had declared a kind of black embargo, which is her favorite kind of embargo, but added that if Brianna wanted to move inventory, she could post a 2-day family discount code as a support local gesture, and I would absolutely boost it, since community is nothing if not a group agreement to make each other look slightly better than we could alone. Brianna loved the idea, and within an hour she had a tasteful story up about elegant neutrals and bold blacks for winter dinners, tagged half the cousins, and messaged me the code, which was the boutique name plus the word important, which made me laugh in a way that left my ribs feeling aired out. I did not tell anyone to buy black. I did not have to. Women know what photographs well, and men know that a black blazer can cover sins and a late arrival, and if you float a discount into a family group before a heavily photographed dinner hosted by a woman who treats candid shots like evidence, you do not need to campaign, you simply need to step back and let gravity do her work. By afternoon, the group chat that usually lives on birthday cake emojis was pulsing with photos: Brianna's wrap dress, Tasha's sleek jumpsuit, Uncle Ron's text about pulling a black suit out of the dry cleaning bag for the first time since that fundraiser where we ate salmon like it was a ritual, and Amanda, who monitors the thread the way a park ranger watches for smoke, posted a brittle "Oh, looks like it will be a very elegant evening," followed by a smiley that did not have teeth. I could have stopped there, with the petty satisfaction of watching her rule turn into a shopping list, but the nicer thing, nicer for everyone except the part of Amanda that loves a sign, was to make her backpedal gracefully without making her crash. I replied warmly to her message and added that Aunt Lorraine had mentioned being honored at her church next month for 40-plus years of teaching choir kids to find the high note, which means she counts as important wherever she goes, and that I would love to walk in with her. The family thread lit up with congratulations, because people like a clear reason to do what they already want to do, and Amanda, boxed in by her own important people wear black rule, had to type the words, Aunt Lorraine absolutely should wear black. And once that permission existed in writing, it spread like the good kind of gossip. By evening I had moved 2 inches of ground without raising my voice, a discount code humming through the thread, several outfits purchased, one exception granted on principle rather than pity, and a simple revised expectation floating through the family like a fragrant rumor that nobody wants to chase down. My revenge was not scorched earth. It was a small and surgical greenhouse, and inside it the dress code was already blooming out of season. I closed my laptop, put out 2 bowls for the cat who believes he pays the mortgage, and set my phone to do not disturb, because tomorrow would require a steady face and a patient tone, and the satisfaction of tonight was enough, a rule loosened, a host forced into magnanimity, and a sister who does not know yet that the most dangerous shade of black is the one she invited into the room herself. By the time I pulled into Amanda's driveway, the sky had that late winter color that makes every porch light look like it is auditioning for warmth, and her house, wide, beige, curated down to the potted rosemary by the door, glowed as if it knew it was being watched, which it always does on nights when Amanda has a seating chart and a speech folded into her napkin. I carried my casserole like a peace offering and my tote like a harmless accessory, though inside it sat the small leather folio I never leave anywhere unguarded, because paper is not dramatic until it speaks, and tonight it would not speak, it would only sit there, heavy as a sealed envelope that remembers what is inside even when you pretend you do not. At the threshold she looked me over, eyes skimming for rule breaks the way airport security scans for liquids, and when her gaze landed on my dark blue dress, midnight without confession, fitted without apology, she gave the tight smile of a person who thinks they have won something and says, perfect, Thank you for respecting the tone, as if I had not already decided to respect the architecture while moving the furniture 1 inch left when she was not looking. Inside, the living room vibrated with those pre-dinner small courtesies that smell faintly of deodorant and ambition. Her husband, Ethan, did the rounds with a glass that never seems to empty. The neighbors made jokes about parking like they were performing a ritual to ward off complaints, and our parents, adorable in an exhausted way, stood near the mantel pretending to read the framed family photo while actually measuring Amanda's mood the way people in tornado country watch clouds. On the sideboard sat place cards in her tight serif font, tiny command posts waiting to tell us who we are and how much we matter, and I found mine not at the end, but at the flank, a calculated mercy that says, "You are not the main course, but you are visible enough to be grateful," and I slipped my tote under the chair, let my shoulders fall into a posture that reads as cooperative, and began the pleasant work of cataloging details that might matter later. Because the difference between spite and strategy is the index you keep. If you want to understand Amanda, watch her at the top of a table when she calls for attention without actually calling for it. She lifts her chin a fraction, taps her wine glass like she is tuning it, and then drops a line that seems complimentary until you hear the stitching, something like, "We are so lucky to have all these bright, hard-working people here, especially those of us who are between big things and still show up with such grace," which is a sentence that wears a sweater vest and carries a pocket knife, and if you are not careful you will lean into it and get nicked. I smiled, because I have learned to treat that blade like a museum piece, admired from a safe distance, and I said something about the food smelling incredible. And she preened because the food is the one arena where she loves control more than control loves her back. The first plate landed salmon with a citrus glaze that is probably legally protected by her favorite cooking blog, and the room settled into that rhythm families have, clinks and interruptions and an uncle's laugh that worries the cat, and I let my tone be easy enough to pass inspection while my eyes kept time with the front door clock. I did not get through 3 conversational detours, Ethan's firm expanding into markets he pronounces like a Geography B finalist, the neighbor's son who is considering law, if you can believe a sophomore who still loses his wallet twice a month, Aunt Lorraine describing her choir kids learning to shape a vowel like an apology, before Amanda found the seam she always wants to find, the one where my work might look small under the dining room light. She leaned in and said, sweet as titanium, that it must be nice to take time after a long stint of overworking in a field that can be so draining, and how she, personally, is a huge believer in balance, which is something people say when the world has already decided to balance itself in their favor. I said I agreed, because the trick is to agree with the parts that do not cost you, and then, without ceremony, I asked whether the florist had any trouble finding the house, since I know the street numbers here get quirky after dark. A tiny blink crossed her face, the kind that would not register on camera but makes husbands tense, and she said she had not ordered flowers because the room, as you can see, is complete. The knock at the door was not theatrical, which is how you know it was real. It was a polite professional rhythm, and Ethan stood to answer because he has always loved to play host even when it is more costume than character. And a moment later a young woman in a dark jacket stepped in with 2 low, heavy arrangements that looked like night had learned manners, black dahlias and black calla lilies glistening like they had something to say, and the ring of white ranunculus that kept the whole thing from collapsing into drama, and I could feel the air change the way rooms do when a new rule enters quietly. Amanda stood to intercept, smiling the way people smile at children performing magic, and she said something about a misunderstanding because she had not ordered, and the florist, bless her service training, simply offered the card sitting in its little metal fork. Ethan took it and read in his public voice, "For the important people," then paused, turned the card toward the light, and added, "Sent by, well, looks like the return name is our own family's." He handed it to Amanda, who read my neat signature and pressed her lips together into what she considers neutral. I kept my fork moving because stillness is an admission, and I said that black flowers are classic for winter dinners, elegant without being grim, and that low arrangements help people speak to one another without craning, which even her chiropractor would endorse. And the guests nodded because the logic is hard to argue with when you are already looking at beauty. Amanda laughed that brittle hostess laugh that suggests allergies to irony, and said the color story tonight was elevated minimal, which everyone could see was a jawline made of beige, and I offered, softly, that minimal does not mean colorless, and that elegance has never asked permission. The flowers were placed, the room recalibrated itself, and the photographs from this evening, whether printed or merely held in phones, would carry a black pulse that contradicts her memo, which is a small but insolent mercy I could not have achieved with any speech. As coffee arrived, served in cups Amanda insists are heirlooms though the box in the pantry still has a barcode, Ethan raised his glass for the planned toast about his partnership expansion, and I folded my napkin once, slipped a hand into my tote, and settled my fingers on the leather folio the way you rest your hand on the railing before the final stare. I did not remove it, I did not wave paper, I did not make a point, I simply let my posture announce, to anyone paying attention, that I was in possession of something heavier than the salmon, and when Amanda's eyes clocked the movement they flicked to my face and back down like a swimmer checking for depth. The toast lifted, the glasses chimed, and in the clatter of gratitude I set down the first course of my own quiet revenge. Flowers that obeyed her rule while defying its spirit, a card that made the room complicit in the joke without forcing anyone to pick sides, and a single gesture toward my bag that told her, in a language we have always shared, that the most important black in the room had not even been worn yet. The second course slid in with the grace of a synchronized swim team, little steaks seared to that smug restaurant medium rare, roasted carrots lined up like soldiers who knew they were photogenic, and Amanda, newly stabilized by the applause Ethan's partnership toast had coaxed from the room, shifted into her favorite gear, that faux casual monologue where she scatters compliments like birdseed while leading us to the topic she cares about, which, predictably, was the charity gala she chairs and the black tie rules she enforces, not for gatekeeping, of course, but for brand cohesion, a phrase that sounds harmless until you have lived through a childhood where your very existence had to match someone else's font. She lifted her glass again, not quite a toast, more a signal flare, and launched into a tidy lecture about how wearing black communicates authority only when it is earned by contribution, which made 3 of her bored friends beam like they had just turned in their homework on time, and made me remember the day in high school when she told me in the car that my voice was too earnest for sarcasm, which was the same day I vowed to save my sarcasm like a vintage whiskey I would pour only when the glass could handle it. It would have been easy to spar right there, to point out that color does not certify character and dress codes have always been the cheapest trick for people who fear being measured on anything less controllable. But I have learned that the truly effective correction happens when everyone else arrives at it without noticing who drew the map. So I let her sail another minute on elevated minimal principles while I glanced down the table at Aunt Lorraine, who was glowing the soft way a person glows when 60 pairs of children's hands have clapped for her across decades, and then at the neighbor on the school board, who looked like a man already composing 3 polite emails in his head. When Amanda reached the part about her upcoming gala where the distinguished guests will be in black, as always, I picked up my water, caught Ethan's eye as he scanned for cues like a nervous referee, and, as gently as a person asks for salt, I asked whether we might take a quick photo to honor our own distinguished guests at this table tonight, since family comes before fundraisers and this room is full of people who have contributed to things that actually changed a day or two for somebody, not just a program or a plaque. Before she could veto, I stood careful, calm, with that light host-adjacent tone she cannot openly punish, and added that it could be fun to follow her brand guidelines, so, per the rule of the evening, perhaps anyone wearing black could pop up for a quick snapshot in the living room, toasting importance in all its unglamorous forms like showing up with soup when someone's kid is sick, or grading papers at midnight, or hauling a tenor section across a tricky rehearsal. There was a heartbeat where you could hear the HVAC negotiating with itself, and then chairs scraped, napkins fell, and a slow, almost comic wave of black rose around her, Aunt Lorraine with her shawl that looked like a benediction. Brianna in the wrap dress that forgives cake and heartbreak, Uncle Ron in the suit that carries funeral memories and still manages to be brave, Tasha in her sleek jumpsuit that said working mother without screaming for applause, two of Ethan's partners who had come straight from an event. Wear black is the uniform of not embarrassing yourself. Even the neighbor with the board seat who sheepishly patted his blazer as if it had asked him to stand without his permission. Amanda watched the standing become a majority, then a crowd. Then nearly everyone except the handful of beige holdouts who suddenly looked like brochures for a minimalist furniture store, and her smile performed a delicate ballet between magnanimity and panic. I clapped, because joy is also a tool, and someone called out a neat joke about needing a wider lens, and I handed my phone to one of the teenagers who had drifted in from the den smelling like video games and chips, asking for 3 quick shots and a short video since motion makes memories breathe, then guided the group into the living room where the low black arrangements had already rewritten the room's thesis. Amanda trailed us with a hostess's chirp about lighting and angles that flatter. But the camera found its own honesty the way cameras do when no one is bullying them. I said, in that voice you save for parents at school concerts, that this toast was for the kind of importance that does not always get a microphone. Importance that looks like casseroles on sad Tuesdays and rides to appointments nobody wants and late-night lesson plans and volunteer hours that no one invoices. And then, after the clink and the laugh and the quick burst of applause that felt a little like relief, I added one last line pitched to sound like a compliment while wearing the body armor of a boundary. Tonight's dress code made it easy to spot the important people, so thank you, Amanda, for the clarity. If you want to watch a person negotiate with gravity, watch them when the room steals their weather. She opened her mouth with a perky of course, that aimed for gracious and landed somewhere near swallowing a lemon. Then tried to reclaim the stage by announcing dessert as if it were a hostage exchange. But the spell had shifted, because once a group sees itself as a group, the old signage loses a little of its ink. Back at the table, where plates of chocolate tart made everyone easier to love, I placed my leather folio next to my water with the kind of casualness that only comes from practice and adrenaline, and when Amanda's eyes flicked to it and then to me, I answered the unspoken question with a shrug I have used in court hallways and kindergarten pickup lines. Go on, ask. It will only make this worse for you. She did not ask, because some part of her reads the weather too, so she pivoted to Ethan's expansion again, tried to loop in the neighbor with that eager, tell us about admissions this year tone, and I let her work, since mercy is also a tool, while the photo ricocheted through the family thread, where our parents typed 3 too many heart emojis and someone added a caption that made me snort water. Important, confirmed. My little revenge, simple, photogenic, technically obedient to her own rule, settled into the evening like a seed that knows which way is down, and yet it did not scratch the real itch under my ribs. The one formed by years of being told that my worth would always need a chaperone. I wanted something cleaner, something that did not humiliate but did correct, something that would stand up tomorrow morning when the dishwasher ran and the beige regained its confidence. So when the plates cleared and the chatter rose and I could feel the night turning the corner toward harmless, I pushed my chair back, smiled at Ethan, and told the table I was stepping out for a moment to grab something from my car that might help us end with a proper toast. Not the kind that flatters portfolios, but the kind that recognizes work that never gets named out loud. Amanda's hand tightened around her glass. Her laugh went up a full note like a balloon people pretend not to hear, leaking, and as I crossed the hallway I could feel the whole house lean, just slightly, in the direction of the truth I had worn under my patience for longer than anyone in that room would have guessed. The cold air in the garage hit my face with that metallic sting that always makes me feel awake enough to make a decision I will not walk back from in the morning, and while the door rolled down behind me like a curtain, I popped the trunk and reached for the garment bag whose zipper has a sound I can recognize even in a crowded hallway, the sound of years of practice lining up at one quiet edge of a moment and asking if I am brave enough to stand where they lead. I laid the leather folio on the passenger seat, unzipped the bag, and touched the heavy black fabric the way a person touches a family Bible carefully, with gratitude and a sliver of fear. then lifted the robe free and shrugged into it over my midnight dress, feeling the weight settle across my shoulders with the certainty of machinery locking into place, familiar and serious and absolutely not negotiable. I took the small gavel from the glove compartment. Yes, I keep it there because life is a circus and sometimes you need the prop that is not a prop at all, and for a beat I let my head rest against the steering wheel while I counted my breath, not because I doubted the choice, but because you do not walk into a room and change the weather without first respecting the roof. Then I opened the door, squared the robe so it fell clean and correct, and walked back down the hallway toward the sound of dessert spoons tapping porcelain like polite applause for a performance I had not agreed to attend as a supporting character. When I reached the archway to the dining room, I did not clear my throat or wait for silence or smile to make this easier, because this was not a joke and not a costume and not, despite the temptation, a middle finger dressed up for church. I stepped in so the light hit me without creating a halo that would make this sentimental, placed the leather folio on the end of the table where a runner pretended to be important, held the gavel low so it would not read as threat, and said, in the same calm courtroom cadence I use when a room needs to find its spine, that we had honored a partnership expansion and a board update and a school rumor and a tart that could pass for a small moon, and now I would like to honor the stated dress code with a short, practical demonstration about who decides what counts. The clatter stopped like someone had put the night on pause. Ethan's mouth opened and then remembered his teeth. The neighbor's eyebrows tried to leave his face for the safety of his hairline, and our parents, direct optimists, both reached for their water as if hydration had a moral component. Amanda stood, because she cannot be seated when the room is not kneeling toward her, and managed a tight little laugh designed to call this adorable. After which she said, and I will give her points for form, that while this is very theatrical, we are, after all, just having dinner. I said that dinner is where families teach each other what power looks like, and that for years I have been a very good student of her rules, and that tonight seemed as appropriate a time as any to add one small correction to the syllabus. I tapped the gavel once. Not hard, not for drama, just enough to turn the air into a tuned surface, and told them that 2 weeks ago I was sworn in after a long, unphotographed stretch of work I did not advertise because I was busy doing it, and that while black does not make a person important, and robes do not sanctify a human being beyond error, there is a reason these garments exist, and it is not so hostesses can ration dignity like dessert. Someone gasped, and someone whispered my name in that way people do when they realize the version of you they have been holding in their heads needs a larger shelf, and Amanda, bless the consistency of her reflexes, attempted a pivot into sisterly pride by announcing that of course she knew I was doing something in law, which landed with the credibility of a weather forecast delivered from a tanning bed, and while Ethan looked genuinely impressed in a way I will remember when I need to think something kind about him, she tried to finish the sentence with a joke about how now we will finally get out of parking tickets, because when you have built an empire on control, you reach for banter when the drawbridge malfunctions. I did not look at her when I spoke next, because this was not about humiliating her in a way that would salt the ground we both have to walk on later, but about correcting the calibration of a room that has lived too long with a crooked level. I said that tonight I would like to use my new authority for something small and binding only in this house, and that is to declare, for the record of our family, that black is not a gate but a garment, that importance is not a dress code but a habit, and that anyone who showed up here tonight with casseroles and patience and rides and tutoring and calendars and choir anthems and grace has earned the right to wear whatever shade tells the truth about their day. I tapped the gavel once more, lighter this time, and the sound made the low arrangements tremble as if even the flowers were listening, and Aunt Lorraine began to clap, not the loud clap of an audience that wants to be seen, but the steady clap of a conductor signaling an ending that everyone can follow. The table followed her, because they always have, and in that applause there was relief and surprise and a little awkwardness, the good kind, the kind that breaks a pattern without breaking a person. Amanda sat slowly, smile welded in place like a storefront sign after hours, and said that of course family comes first, and that she was only trying to make the evening cohesive, and that she is so proud, so very proud of her little sister, who is, it turns out, Not little at all, and I let her have the line because life is long and the neighbors live nearby, and because my revenge does not require her to admit defeat, only to live inside a new rule she did not write. I lifted my glass to the group and said, with more humor than triumph, that if anyone needs a verdict to go with dessert, I can be bought with chocolate, which loosened the room just enough to laugh, and then I put the gavel back in my tote like a tool after a job that does not need a speech. Later, when the night thinned and the coats came out and the photos circulated with captions that will embarrass me tomorrow, Amanda hugged me in that stiff way that avoids actual contact and whispered that I could have told her sooner, which was true in the factual sense and false in the moral one, so I said, not unkindly, that sometimes you have to see a rule from the outside to understand why it does not get to live here anymore. On the drive home, with the robe folded on the seat like a sleeping animal and the folio humming beside it with papers that did not need to be shown, I thought about whether I had gone too far. Whether I had turned a family dinner into a civics lesson that tasted a little like victory and a little like ash, and I decided to let the question stay open, because ambiguity is not the enemy of justice. It is the quiet hallway it sometimes has to walk down alone. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the window, tired, relieved, a little tender around the eyes, and I said out loud, to the empty car that has heard worse, that black is a color, not a crown, and that revenge, when it is clean and specific and not meant to draw blood, can be a kind of mercy that leaves enough room at the table for next time, if next time ever learns how to behave.